About a month ago, during the video game console episode of the Gaming Codex, I made a comment about Chrono Trigger having a bit too much grind in it for its own good. And in the comments of that video, Comrade Sterner pointed out that Diablo also has a lot of grind in it, but I do like that game, so wouldn't it be a bit hypocritical to criticize one game for having grind and not the other one? And I said that this is a really good subject that warrants its own show, so this is that show. The show where I describe to you the intricacies and subtleties of video game grinding. Now, what exactly is grind? Should probably make a gaming codex about this too. But the core idea of grind as it is perceived in video games comes in the form of repetitive, dull, boring, busy work. Something that is almost fundamentally opposed to the concept of enjoyment. Something tedious. Something that you no longer want to do but have no options to circumvent in a video game. And sadly, a lot of games have that as their core gameplay, most MMOs for example. Well, maybe not most MMOs, but the majority of the ones coming out of Asia or the ones that came out of Asia during a certain time period. I should know, I used to do a weekly show for about 2 or 3 years where I played 100 of them or so. It scarred me for life. You get the basic idea. Grind can come in several forms. It's combat grind when you have to repeat the same kind of battles over and over again. There's resource grinding where you just have to punch a tree until it bleeds diamonds or your face starts to melt, or generally doing activities that are not really all that enjoyable on a fundamental basis. Now, what exactly does make activities enjoyable in a game? Well, I'm not going to get into the broader subject of designing mining mechanics so they don't make you want to punch babies, but I will limit myself to the part of grind that started this discussion, combat grinding, namely the ways that Chrono Trigger did it and that Diablo does it. Now, these two games have some very noticeable differences, one of them being a turn-based game and the other one being a real-time game. Diablo is faster. Combat in it flows a lot quicker, so it does have an upper hand by its sheer simple base mechanics when compared to Chrono Trigger in terms of making you feel like you're not wasting your time. But that's not saying that turn-based games can't have good combat. Take Divinity Original Sin for example. It has some of the best combat ever in games in general. It's turn-based, it's not what you would call the fastest possible, but it is superb, it is excellent. It does not feel tedious. And it doesn't feel tedious because of the same reason that for the most part Diablo doesn't feel tedious either. Well, I should say for the reasons, because I would say there are 3 main basic reasons. Let's call them quantity, quality, and challenge. The last one is the easiest to understand, challenge. Is this combat encounter in any way challenging? Does it actually require me to be mentally active or at least have my reflexes attuned so that I may pass through this encounter whole? Or does it just require me to mash the A button or the enter key or click and bam, it's done? Now you may say to yourself that Diablo has the exact same problem. You mow through waves and waves of enemies just spamming attacks with the click, just like you would do in Chrono Trigger where you just spam the A key or the A button because played on a gamepad and just go through the auto list of attacks and kill everything. Well, yeah, they both can have the same amount of challenge and require about the same amount of involvement from the player. There are difficult battles within Chrono Trigger, there are difficult battles in Diablo. In this point, they do not really differ all that much. Some games, however, do have problems here because they tend to make combat either too easy to the point where you just don't feel engaged enough, or they make it obscenely hard to the point where you have to well, you have to do even more grind to be able to do the grind that you were going to do in the first place. A well-balanced difficulty level is vital to making a game not feel like it's a chore. If it's a more power fantasy oriented kind of game, yeah, blowing through mountains of enemies with a gigantic explosion, yeah, that feels great. If it's more of a focused, limited scope fighting game like Dark Souls, where just one enemy can absolutely crush you, yeah, that's great too. Anything in between can be good as long as it's well balanced enough. As long as between the incredibly hard battles there are some bits that are a bit easier, that make you feel like you've actually acquired something between your multiple battles with gigantic enemies, and you do have something to show for it. You can now absolutely stomp all over an enemy that a while ago could destroy you. You can't keep the player constantly in the mind space that, yeah, the next enemy is gonna kill me in one hit. It gets stressful, it gets actually kind of boring, and you don't want to just give them a nuke spell that they can use constantly either, like Raul used to spam in that live stream we did with Dungeons and Dragons Shadow over Mystra, where he played a mage and constantly spammed the same attack. It was Tower of Doom, one of the Capcom Dungeons and Dragons games. Okay, so that's challenge. You got it right. Have a good challenge that keeps the player engaged constantly. That is one aspect of avoiding the grind, or at least the feeling that the grind is not fun, it's not engaging. But it's not all of it, because again, Chrono Trigger has that kind of structure. It has difficult battles, easy battles, it has good battles, ones that make you live in the moment, and a few more where you can just zone out for a bit and be on your way after you kill them with just 2 or 3 clicks. Same goes for Diablo. Now comes the more difficult ones, quantity and quality. Let's start with quantity. What exactly are you killing and how many of them are there? Problem with a lot of games is that they all too often have the tendency to not really offer variety in the kind of enemies you kill, the kind of enemies that try to fight you, the kind of enemies where you kinda do have to just pummel away at in the hopes that you'll gain a few more points to your level, or it will maybe drop that item you've been looking for. Varying the enemies is very important. If you're gonna have 1,000 enemies, all of them being of the same type, is gonna get boring really fast. Really fast. So when you have multiple combat encounters in the same area, which in the case of Chrono Trigger are sometimes not skippable, and they're all the same and they respawn after you go off screen, it gets boring because there's no surprise. You know this enemy, maybe it's even a solved problem for you, like you don't even get a challenge out of it anymore. It's the same enemy you've been facing for the longest time possible. It's the same problem that Drakensang had, which it was a very good game up to a point. One of the points not being that you used to fight rats everywhere, or that the ooze you would fight on the first level was also in the last dungeon 30 hours later. That's not a good way to space out your enemies. They get boring, they get repetitive. You start sort of seeing holes in the illusion. The illusion that you're doing something else than standing in front of a screen, pressing a button. It makes you step outside yourself and look at yourself while you're doing just that. And that's not something you want a game to do. When you're playing a game, you don't want to realize that you're just pressing a button and not doing anything interesting, anything engaging. You're wasting time. If you wanted to do that, you would probably just go back to your office and work some more on those spreadsheets. To counter this, a game either needs more varied enemies or enemies of the same type that can do more than one thing, that have multiple attacks, multiple tactics, multiple abilities, and they will use different sets of them depending on the situation. They'll learn, they'll do something interesting almost each time. Diablo does this to a certain extent. Enemies from the get-go can be varied, can be interesting, and another game that does it quite well is Path of Exile. It's got enemies that do all sorts of crazy things, which is why I kinda actually like it a bit better than Diablo 3. If it had a better setting and story, maybe I would like it more than Diablo 2. So you can have 1,000 enemies of the same type if at least those same types can do more than one thing, or more than 2 things, or more than how many things is required for that thousand of enemies to not feel like you're fighting the exact same dude over and over again. So that's quantity. Now for quality, and by this I mean the actual quality of the combat system in general or the combat encounters themselves. It relates to what you as the player can do, because if you've got a bow and you shoot things, it's gonna get boring after a few hours if that's all you do. That was my experience with the Ranger in Guild Wars 2. However, I switched to the Elementalist class in Guild Wars 2 and I was turning into a giant tornado and chasing people around the map. That was a lot more fun than just standing back, shooting a bow and occasionally setting my pet to kill stuff. A lot more fun. It was hella fun because it was something different, something I did not expect, something that is not the same as all my other abilities. In Chrono Trigger you do have your magic abilities that can be stacked with your teammates and you will get a more interesting result. But you don't really have that much magic or that many combinations possible in a single encounter. Whereas in Diablo, you've got a lot of options. You can Frozen Orb, you can Charge Bolt, you can Teleport and Nova people in the face, you can Fireball, you can Hydra, well you can Hydra and then run around fireballing people in the face. You can Bone Spear, you can Golem, you can Curse, you can do a lot of things. And you do all these while you're moving around, always moving around, not standing still, not waiting for the enemy's turn. Again, it's an advantage that a real-time combat game has, which doesn't really matter that much because Divinity Original Sin is a turn-based combat game, but it still has some of the best quality combat possible because your characters have a plethora of abilities. They have a large number of extremely varied capabilities in combat. And not only that, but the effects that those capabilities, that those skills generate can also interact with each other and with the environment. And that leads to stuff like making a cloud of poison out of a barrel you found lying around and a fireball, or teleporting an enemy into a pit of flames, then dousing him with water and having steam come up and then electrifying the steam and then killing everybody in a cloud of lightning. That's just one combat encounter. That's all the crazy stuff you can do in just one particular situation. But there's more of them. There's an insane amount of possibilities. There's so many of them that even though you're going at a fairly slow pace through each combat encounter, they do not feel slow. They do not feel like you're repeating the same encounter again and again and again. Thankfully, because enemies do not respawn in this game, you actually have to progress. There's no repeating a battle, so you can get more experience out of it. Now contrast this to Wasteland 2, that also has a turn-based combat mode. One that does make it feel a bit grindy, because there's not really all that much variety in it, and what you can actually do. Yeah, even with the director's cut where they added the ability to actually aim for different parts of the body, it's still not good. You still don't feel like you're fighting different enemies. You mostly feel like you're fighting the same types over and over again, maybe with some more hit points, though you do fight badgers at one time, so that's actually something fun. So that would be the general difference between grind that feels like it's mind-numbingly boring and grind that doesn't feel like grind. It actually feels like, you know, fun, like something that's engaging. Chrono Trigger doesn't start out feeling like a grind. In the beginning it actually feels quite nice, but as you go along with it and go through the same combat encounters again and again and again, it becomes boring as all hell. It just becomes aggravating. And that's something that's true for a lot of RPGs made in that vein, especially those with random combat encounters that can honestly just go throw themselves into a lake. And this comes from someone that reached level 99 with Cloud in Final Fantasy VII on the first CD because I didn't have the rest of them. But still, that was something that I chose to do, not something I was forced to do. There's a bit of a difference there. Giving someone a choice always makes things a bit less aggravating. And Chrono Trigger, after a point, did not really give you all that many choices. Your abilities didn't expand exponentially like they do in some other games, like in Diablo, like in Divinity Original Sin. They plateau, but yet there's still more game left, with more enemies, and not really all that much going for it in terms of combat. More options would have really helped. More enemy variety, more variety in the things that enemies do. Maybe even less of a focus on grinding through, I don't know, stuff like the enemies in the Fiend Lord's castle before you can actually beat the Fiend Lord, because you didn't spend a lot of time grinding the enemies in the previous areas, and more focus on defeating a set of enemies with the expanded abilities you would have, you know, the extra options on making the right choices, or at least making smart choices. Going back again to Divinity Original Sin, you could go into combat encounters that would absolutely curb stomp you, but if you were loony enough to load Madora with just about every barrel you found up to that point, and then just chuck them at the enemies and blow everything up, yeah, you would do okay even in hard battles. It was kind of a one-shot thing, and then you'd have to get more battles, but it was a lot more fun, a lot more rewarding than just spending an hour killing the same enemies. Because what reward do you get? Yeah, you get experience, but do you get something good? You get to defeat the boss, okay. Yeah, that's what the game was expecting me to do anyway. Do I get something extra, something good, something bonus? Do I get the fabled Halabard of Ishkabibble? Do I get an epic drop? Do any of those rats and bats have a chance of dropping the nipply Mangelbrack that gives +7 to sexy? No, they don't. So I'm gonna add one last thing to the quality, quantity, and challenge stuff. The reward, the payoff. What do I get? Because if all I get is to go on, and I don't come out with something uber cool out of it, yeah, it's absolutely not worth it. That's what sets Diablo apart from Chrono Trigger. In Diablo, you can do 10 ball runs, which are the same combat encounter, same combat loop again and again, but during one of them, you may get an absolutely bonkers mad item, which will then help you do the same kind of thing again and again and again faster, or with more options at least. Whereas in Chrono Trigger, I did not get that. And in all those MMOs I used to play, no, yeah, the odds of actually getting something were ungodly slim. You kind of got the idea that, oh yeah, these things have those plus chance to drop scrolls for a reason, because standard drop rates are murder. So that would be it for my ideas on grind. If you have your own, please feel free to say so in the comments, and maybe we can have a discussion there as well. Goodbye.